Hola y bienvenidas a Sex and Spanglish, where we empower mujeres to get in touch with their bodies, own their pleasure, and where we discuss all the cochinadas our abuelas didn't tell us about. My name is Ana Lopez. I'm a sexpert, future doctora, certified sex and life coach, proud Latina, and your go-to guide for all things sex. I'm here to help you kick vergüenza to the curb and teach you to have guilt-free sexual pleasure. Basically, I'm here to help you have mind-blowing sex without the guilt and shame you learned to have growing up. Let's be real. La comunidad latina doesn't talk about sex, pero que suerte tienes because this Latina does. It is my vision to have Latinas worldwide discussing sex with one another just like they do with chisme. Así que prepárate. I'm about to change the way you view sex para siempre. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about vulva care and vaginal care. And before I dive into this episode, I want to talk about two different things. So the first is the difference between a vulva and a vagina. So the vulva is the outside, right? It is where the hair grows. It's where your labia or your lips are, where your clit is, right? It's really just the outside genitalia. That is the vulva. The inside is the vagina. So where the baby comes out, where you put menstrual products, where you put like a penis or a finger or whatever, a toy even, that is the vagina. And it's very important to know the difference between the two because they're actually two different body parts, and the care is actually different for both body parts. So again, vulva is the outside, vagina is the inside. Now, this episode is going to be about like hygiene and like regular, this is going to be a really weird word to use, but like maintenance, right, of the vagina and the vulva. And I want to point out that this is for every single person that has a vulva. These points are very important for you to know. This is how you care for your vulva and your vagina. Many people don't know how to do these things or don't know they're supposed to be doing these things. So this is important for everybody. And I want to point out for those of you that are experiencing reoccurring bacterial vaginosis or BV, yeast infections, it is very common for these things to be cyclical, right? So you get BV and then you get a yeast infection and then you get BV and then you get a yeast infection, right? Like, or just chronic yeast infections or chronic BV and things just keep coming back. Or even if you're not being like diagnosed with these things, you're just like, something's off, like there's like an off smell and I just can't get rid of it. Or there's like some type of discomfort or kind of like dryness or itchy or like something's going on and your doctor's like, well, I don't know what the fuck's going on, right? So if that is you, all of the points in this episode are going to be super beneficial for you, particularly. So again, this is for everybody that has a vulva and vagina, but it's going to be particularly helpful for those of you that are combating chronic yeast infections or bacterial vaginosis or some other type of vaginal infection. I am going to do a whole episode on BV and yeast infections because they are very similar, but they are different, right? So they're two different things, but the symptoms are very similar and they often go hand in hand, right? So it is very common for people to get BV and then end up getting a yeast infection immediately afterwards. And so I really want to talk about, I want to give those two things their own episode. And as someone who had like what was considered chronic, which is more than, I think it's like more than like 2 or 3 infections in a year. This happened to me years ago, but I really want to talk about that and how you can, I want to talk about the signs and all of that because even with, Western medicine, it's not very helpful in my experience. And so I really want to talk about that. But in this episode, I'm really going to be talking about preventative medicines. These things are also going to be very helpful just in general, even if you already have the infection itself. So with that said, let's get into it. So first, I'm going to be talking about what do you put in your body. First and foremost, there are only a few things that should be going inside the vagina, right? So inside of your body. Should be a speculum. So when you go to the gynecologist to get your pap smear and they put a speculum in and the little, I actually don't know what it's called, but that long ass Q-tip thing or like anything like that, that is okay. It's all medical grade. It's, supposed to go in there. You can put vaginal suppositories or some type of medication that's supposed to go inside the vagina. You also want to be really clear, particularly with yeast infection medications. There are some medications that can go both outside and inside. Some medications are only for outside. So you really want to be sure, is my medication external only? Is it internal only? Is it both? Right? So you want to be really clear when you are putting things inside the vagina, and even just on the vulva, right? Like, is this actually the thing that is okay for me to put there, particularly because the skin on the vulva is so sensitive. The next thing that you can put in your body that is like, we'll call it approved or appropriate, is body parts, right? So if you think of like tongue, fingers, a penis, a fist, if that's your thing. Maybe y'all are putting toes in there. I don't know. Anyways, any clean body part can go in there. That is okay. Obviously, you can put menstrual products, right? So tampons, discs, cups, right? Disposable or reusable. Either one is totally fine. Obviously, if they're disposable, you want to make sure that they've been properly cleaned beforehand. But all of those things are okay to put inside. You want to avoid any douching. You want to avoid soap. You want to avoid any like foods or anything like that. Those things do not go in the vagina. You do not need to clean the vagina. The vagina actually cleans itself. A lot of people, particularly those of you that are struggling with some type of off smell for whatever reason, infection or otherwise, will want to put like water or soap in the vagina, and it actually makes it worse. So not only are you potentially causing an infection or exacerbating symptoms of an infection, you could actually potentially be making the smell even worse if there is one, or the irritation, because soap isn't supposed to go in there, and it could actually throw off the pH even more, which then causes more potentially pain, discomfort, infections, etc. So nothing goes in the vagina. You don't even need to put water in there. It does not need to go in there. That is not necessary. Let's really quickly talk about toys, because that is one thing that I did mention that could go in there. Go there being the vagina, right? Toys can go in the vagina. You only want to use toys outside of an infection. It is very common for people with vaginas to be like, well, I can't have sex with my partner because I have an infection, but I really want to have sex, so I'm going to use a toy, and I'll just clean it really well afterwards. That is not recommended. Please do not have sex when you have an infection, either with a toy or with a person. Not only is it not really sanitary, it can also exacerbate the symptoms of the infection and can actually introduce more bacteria. And so it's just, you can do it, but should you? No. So avoid sex while having an infection. But let's say you don't have an infection and you're going to have sex and you're going to use a toy. Great. You want to be sure to clean the toy before and after. It is very common for folks to use a toy and then clean it afterwards. And then the next day or the next time they go to use it, they just pick up the toy because it's been cleaned before. But actually you want to be cleaning it before and after every single time to ensure that there is, any bacteria has been wiped away, because it is very easy to throw off the pH balance of the vagina. You also want to be sure that toys are fully dried before putting them away. With I keep forgetting what it's called, cottage cheese. So I will talk about those two things, and then I will end this episode because I do not want to spend 30 more minutes talking about what you put on your body. So in terms of the Greek yogurt, I make this thing. In my mind, I call it bionico. It's really not. It's Greek yogurt with some fucking fruit. But the way that I make it is really good. So anyway, plain Greek yogurt. I actually make it for the whole week. So it's really cool because it lasts the whole week. So I'll make it Sunday evening and it lasts me Monday through Friday. So a whole tub of plain Greek yogurt. I add some coconut shreds, unsweetened. You can find those like in the bacon aisle. You can also find them like Mexican food stores typically have them, but you want to make sure that they're not sweetened. So coconut shreds. I will add some like slivered almonds because those are easier to chew. You can also get those in the baking section if you're wondering where those are. And then I really like it with grapes, but you can choose any fruit you want. I usually only pick one fruit. I've done it with grapes. I've done it with blueberries. I've done it with strawberries. You can really do it with any fruit you like. I think I've also done it with pineapple. And you want to make sure that you're getting, I prefer it with the fresh fruit. You can do frozen if you want. I think the fresh fruit tastes better in this particular recipe. So you just cut up the fruit the way that you like. You want to make sure that there's no sugar added, right? It's really just like fresh fruit. If you're going to use frozen fruit, make sure that it's just frozen fruit and it's not any sugar added or anything like that. I add a little bit of Mexican vanilla, specifically Mexican vanilla. If you haven't tasted Mexican vanilla, it does not taste anything like regular vanilla extract, so you want to make sure you're using Mexican vanilla. Very, very important. And then you mix it all up, and that's it. And you just eat that. I will say that it doesn't have quite enough protein for you to like stay full, so you might have to add something on the side. So maybe like a protein shake if you wanted to, or like a few eggs, like something like that. But because it doesn't have a ton of protein, it's really just the plain Greek yogurt. If you wanted to, you could also add like chia seeds or something. I don't do that because I don't like the texture of chia seeds, and particularly because I make it for all week. It ends up kind of becoming like a chia pudding, which I don't like. But you can add other things to add protein to it if you want it to stay fuller longer. But that is just something that I do. You can even eat it as like a dessert. So again, plain Greek yogurt, plain fruit, a nut of some kind. I prefer almonds. I've also done walnuts. And then some coconut shreds that really, it like sweetens it up. And again, it's the unsweetened ones. And then some vanilla, Mexican vanilla, like a splash of Mexican vanilla. It is so good. And that way you're getting in the live cultures. And then in terms of plain Greek, or in terms of cottage cheese, you can actually add cottage cheese to just about anything. So if you are making a sauce, for example, for a food that like a guisado that you're making, maybe not a guisado, some type of like American guisado, right? So if you wanted to do, actually, no, now that I'm thinking about it, sorry, I didn't have a specific recipe in mind, but I did want to share how to use cottage cheese other than eating it on its own. You could also just make the same recipe that I just mentioned and use cottage cheese instead. That works perfectly fine. But you can put cottage cheese in like a smoothie. So you could do, I really like licuados de avena. So you could just mix oats, a banana, cottage cheese. You can even use an apple instead of apple instead of a banana, and some milk, and blend it up, and then that has the live cultures in it if you are using the cottage cheese that has the live cultures. But really with cottage cheese, you can really just mix it up in anything. For those of you that are like, cottage cheese is fucking gross, I hear you. Make sure you're getting the small curd cottage cheese, and from my experience, the full fat one actually tastes better. Good Culture, again, is the only cottage cheese that has live culture, so you want to make sure that you're getting that brand. But let me throw this caveat in there, is that from what I've seen, Good Culture is the only one that has live cultures. So if you're going to go and get cottage cheese, that's totally fine. I'm not you get to eat whatever the hell you want, but you want to make sure that it has live cultures. So that is all I have to say about what you put in your body. Again, this episode is too long for my liking. So I'm going to do a part 2 with what you put in your body. What you put on your body. So definitely make sure that you're subscribed to the Sex and Spanglish podcast so that you're notified when part 2 comes out, because this is super important. And shortly after, the episode on bacterial vaginosis and yeast infections, and a little bit of information about UTIs will be on there as well. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will talk to y'all next week. If you have made it this far, this means that you have listened to the entire episode, assuming that you didn't skip any parts. So first and foremost, I want to thank you. It is truly an honor and a privilege to get to share my knowledge and expertise every single week, and the fact that people listen is mind-blowing to this day. So thank you. And before you go, I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you have gained anything from this podcast at all, if you learned one thing, if you've subscribed to the podcast, if you plan on coming back next week, if you have applied anything that I've taught you and it has brought you amazing results or even good results, right? Like if you've gotten results from what I've shared by applying what I've shared here in the podcast, I want to ask you to rate this podcast. I'm currently in the process of sharing the impact that this podcast has on the listeners, on the audience, on you all. And that means that I need to hear from you all. I know that people are listening because I see the subscriber number go up each and every week. I see the amount of time being listened to each episode. I see that go up every single week. So I know y'all are listening to entire episodes. I know y'all are listening to these episodes multiple times. I know people are subscribing. So the analytics say so, but I want to hear from you all. So if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review. So, give it a star rating and share 1 to 2 sentences about something that you've learned from the podcast, what you think listeners need to know. If you are on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment letting me know the impact that this episode has had on you. If you are listening on Spotify or some other platform, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram at Sex and Spanglish. You can also send me an email, anna@sexandspanglish.com, and let me know what is resonating for you. What did you take from this podcast and apply to your own life where you've gotten results? Tell me what you like. Also, tell me what you don't like and provide me with suggestions for topics and questions that you might have. I also want to remind you that I do have an anonymous question box. So feel free to go to the show notes and submit your questions there, and I may share them on the podcast anonymously. Of course, all of that is in the show notes. But again, thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. And if there has been anything that you've learned from this episode, please, please, please do me the favor and let me know, whether it be through Apple review, whether it be through DM, whether it be on your stories and sharing like a little snippet and tagging me in it, whether it be a comment on YouTube. I just ask that you share what your thoughts are on this podcast. I'll talk to you next week.